So what I'm going to do now is introduce the topic of cell arrays. And in this video, I just want to deal with the fundamental concepts of what cell arrays are. In the past, we've dealt with arrays of numbers, and we've dealt with arrays of vectors of numbers, arrays of numbers. We dealt with vectors of characters, which we call strings. But we've always said that you can't mix the two. And what happens when you do this is Matlab starts converting the types and doing a whole bunch of crazy stuff, right? And there are other reasons to motivate this is that, you can't do a vector of vectors because Matlab is just going to squish all that into one vector. So you can't keep those vectors sort of in their own little groups. Matlab would do this. And you can't do vectors of strings. All right, so if you did Bob and Sue, you just get all the letters run together like that. So you can't keep individual stuff together. You can't package these things into their own individual packages. Well, you can't package them into their own individual cells, if you will. Well, that's what cell arrays do. They allow us to package information inside of a vector into their own little individual packages. I always give the analogy of, if you had your backpack, and I can't draw a backpack, but let's just say it looks like this. It's a bad looking backpack. Let's say if you had your backpack here with a little zipper. There we go. And if you had the rule that the backpack had to carry all the same thing, then all you could put in there would be maybe books, and so your backpack would have to have all books, or maybe it'd have, just pencils. So your backpack would have just all pencils in it, right? Well, what the cell array does is it sort of fools Matlab. It's Matlab fooling itself, really, because Matlab has to have the same thing in all of its structure, all of its data arrangements. So therefore, everything in a vector has to be the same. But what if we wanted to put different things? Well, what we do is, going back to the backpack analogy, what if we went out and got a whole bunch of Ziploc bags, right? And in our Ziploc bags, we put books, and we put our pencils in this one, okay? Then we take these and we put these in the backpack. Well, if somebody says, what's in your backpack? We say Ziploc bags. And that's true. It is homogeneous in the terms of it has only Ziploc bags in it. What's inside the Ziploc bags may be different, but it only has Ziploc bags. That's this concept of cells in cell arrays, is that what a cell array is a vector full of cells. And what's in the cells can differ, but it is a vector full of cells. And that's the fundamental concept of cell arrays, right? So what it allows us to do, and we indicate a cell array instead of putting brackets like we do for a vector, right? So if I had this vector here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and it's a vector of numbers, and I wanted to turn it into a cell array, I put what some people call the curly brackets. I think they're officially called braces. I put braces around there instead of brackets around there. Brackets indicate vectors, and the braces indicate cell arrays, right? So if you were to do this in Matlab, what would happen when you looked at A, if you hit enter, it would create something that looks like this. Now, I want you to recall, we use these brackets to create vectors, but when they show up in the answers and when they show up when Matlab creates them, because keep in mind, if we did a vector, it's just, if this were a vector, A would just show up as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It wouldn't have these brackets around it. What these brackets are representing is that these are cells. And if you do this in Matlab and then look over at the workspace, it would say that A is a cell array of class cells, right? And we're going to see this when we go into the Matlab. Likewise, if we did B equals, let's say if we did some words now, if we did Bob and Sue, but once again, instead of doing square brackets, we did the braces, right? It would actually give us back Bob and Sue, because these are now cells. It gives us back the actual Ziploc bags. It represents strings with these little tick marks around it if they're in cells, with the quotes around it if they're in cells, and everything else it represents with these square brackets around it. So that's the concept of cell arrays. And thus, if I want to do something that is heterogeneous in nature, let's say if it's 1A 2, if we did that, or let's say 65 80, if we did that in brackets, square brackets, it would convert this to a homogeneous vector, and it would convert this number here to 97, because now they would all be numbers. But if I do a cell array, then what it does is it creates 65, A, and 80. And since these all are cells, and if you looked at this, this would be a 1 by 3 of cells. Since they're all are cells, they're all, in Matlab's eyes, they're all the same thing. They're all in their own Ziploc baggies. And we'll talk a little bit later on about how do you access the Ziploc baggies, but this video was just about the concept of this whole thing called cells and cell arrays. So now I'm going to go to Matlab. I'm going to motivate this idea even further, and hopefully that you'll get understanding with it. So over here in Matlab, I've got, I'm going to push the idea again. So I'm going to start here, and I say vectors keep numbers separate, right? And so if I click on this, you notice that N1 is just a vector, and it's 35, 42, 12, 89. And if I access it at 2, it's 42. So it's allowing me to group these digits together as numbers. And I can access each number with an index, which is very helpful. It also does it in arrays. You know, this is a vertical array, but it's keeping them separate. So I can access with N2 of 2, I can access the whole number 42. So it does that well with individual numbers. However, if I try to do it with vectors, as I said before, if I define the vector v to be this, it's just going to squish it all together. Even though I've got 3 separate vectors in here, it's going to concatenate this whole thing together, and I wind up with just this one long vector, right? And then I do v of 2, and it's going to give me 2. I cannot access this whole individual thing. It'd be nice if I could keep those grouped together, and when I said v of 2, I would actually get that vector. But that's not how we've learned. It will concatenate the whole thing together. Okay. You know, and even if we put it on its own row, right, it's still, just like the arrays we've just done, is that I still lose the whole vector 1, 2, 3. Now it is the individual numbers 1, 2, and 3. So that that can be not to our advantage sometimes. When you go to strings, it's just as bad. You know, with strings, you sort of want to. It'd be nice if you could create an array of strings, an array of these people's names in this example, and keep them all together, and then access Sam by saying A1 of 2. But that's not the case. What happens is it concatenates these strings, because strings are nothing more than vectors of characters, treats them as vectors, shoves them all together, and when I try to do A1 of 2, I get the character M, because these are just, it's just going to put the vector of characters all together. So not really preserving, I can't get to that name right there, Sam. And there are a lot of times we want to do that. So we'll keep motivating here. If you look at it, we could do, now one thing we can do that we've just learned with arrays is I could put all the names on their separate line. And if I do that, I put them on their separate row. If I do that, then A2 is the array Amy, Sam, Sue, Jim. But if I tried to access A2, keep in mind I would just get the capital letter S here because it's an array of characters. If I did A3 sub 2, I would wind up getting the U because that would be the third row down and the second column over. So it's just an array of characters. I could, though, access the entire row like I do here on line 34. I say, give me A2, second row, all columns, and I do wind up with Sam. So that might be some kind of way we can do it. Except for the only problem is that if I wanted to do a string, if I wanted to do strings that have different lengths, now I can't do it because it violates my rule that all rows have to have the same column and all columns have to have the same row. So when I do this, I get an error because Amy is of length 3, that would be a row of 3 characters. Samuel's of length 6, that would be a row of 6 characters, and you can't do that. And Susan's of length 5, and James is of length 5, so it's not going to work. I would have to have all my strings have the same length, and that's not what we want sometimes, especially if we're storing data of different things. So just using this to motivate the need for a cell array. So drum roll, a little corny, but drum roll, we enter the cell array. So now what I'm going to do is define M1 as a cell array. Notice I have the braces here, right? And when I click this, notice now M1 is equal a 1 by 3 of double, a 1 by 3 of double, a 1 by 3 of double. And my answer when I got M2 is a 1 by 3 of double. Well, let's go over here to the workspace. If you notice what's happening, look over here. We've created something new. It's got the braces in this little box. And both of these are braces. And so then it comes over here and says it's a 1 by 3 of cells, and it's of type cell, right? So this is the Ziploc bag. In other words, there are 1 row, 3 columns of cells here. So these braces are representing each individual array. Each individual vector that's inside the cell array. So it's telling you that I've got the Ziploc bag. I can sort of look through it and see that I've got a 1 by 3 of double inside of that Ziploc bag. But it's now preserved. It hasn't concatenated all these together. It has preserved each individual vector here as something in and of itself. And then when I said, okay, give me M1 of 2, it did not give me what's inside the cell. It gave me the cell itself. If you look over here, it says the answer is cell. It gave me the cell itself. And we'll talk about that in a second, but in the next video. But right now, I want you to get the idea that this is now a vector of cells. And the reason it's a vector of cells is because I put the braces around it and not the square brackets. So that creates a vector of Ziploc baggies, if you will. Okay? And then this is accessing the second Ziploc bag. It's not getting into it. It's just pulling the bag out of the backpack. It is not going into the bag. And that's a concept that we'll deal with in the next video. Okay? So motivating some more. Now what we can do is I can define B1 as Amy, Sam, Sue, and Jim, right? Which, if you go over here, is a cell array, 1 by 4 cell array of cells, and then the answer is a cell 2. Because now I get B2, and it actually gives me back, strings are a little different. Instead of giving me the square brackets, it gives me the quotes. But quotes around text indicate that this is a cell with characters in it, okay? It's a cell with strings in it. and with a string in it. And so this becomes a cell array as well. Notice this has the same type as what I did up here on line 39 with M1. They both have type cells, right? Because it's treating everything as a cell, which makes this a homogeneous thing to Matlab, which allows us to do a lot of mixed type of manipulations, which we'll see a little later on. Once again, if I did this and put one in each row, then now I have a 4x1 cell of cells, if you look over here in the workspace. And then B2 is the cell with Sam in it. Once again, I'm just motivating a concept here. We'll work on this concept in class and with other videos. So once again, I could do it this way. I could do new lines. It gives me the same exact array, vertical array of cells. Okay. Also, what's very nice is now my strings don't have to be the same length anymore. It works, and everything's fine. And then so they're just cells, and so there's Ziploc bags that have things in them, and there are 4 Ziploc bags in this cell array. Once you put the curly brackets around there, you define the cell array, and so everything then goes in its own Ziploc bag. And then now it's telling me that I've got 4 things, and this is what's in them, and they're strings. And once again, if I did it with, if I didn't put each one in a row, it still works even though they're not of the same length. Okay. It also works with numbers. If I do a cell array of numbers, it actually puts each individual number in its own, inside the bracket. So each individual number is in a cell. Just like the, when I did this with a cell array of vectors, each one was in its own cell, and those cells are indicated with the brackets. Everything but strings, the cells get indicated with these brackets, whereas strings get indicated with the quotation marks. So C1 and C2 are motivated at the same time here. These are numbers in a vector, and these are numbers in a vertical array. And so if you notice here in the workspace, C1 and C2 are of class cell. Okay? Whereas if I did this, and I put this one here on line 66 to show, if I did numbers in an array, if you remember, notice it doesn't put those in brackets, right? These braces here, I know we use braces to define an array, but when you see them down here in the command window, you're dealing with a cell of numbers here. So when you see them down here in the command window, they're indicating a cell of numbers, a cell of arrays, a cell. I think if we do Boolean, we get them in a cell as well. We'll see that in a second. The only thing that you don't get with the brackets is the quotes, and that indicates a cell of a string. Okay? All right. Continue to motivate this. So they also work with logicals. And so if you notice, the logical 1s and 0s get put inside the brackets as well. And over here in the workspace, they are type cell. Even though we know their logical values, we put the braces around the outside. It wraps everything in its own little Ziploc bag, its own cell. And now everything, that is a vector of cells. We'll talk about how to access the data inside the Ziploc bag in the near future. Okay, and so since everything is a cell, it allows us now to do a backpack with a whole lot of different stuff in it, or a vector with a whole lot of different stuff in it, right? Or an array with a whole lot of different type of stuff in it. If you see here, I've got a cell array with a number, and then I've got a vector, then I've got a string, then I've got a Boolean or logical, and then I start over with another number, another vector, another string, and another logical. And then I access those values here. So if you look here, when I run this, notice I have E. It didn't give me an error. Didn't tell me they were not the right type. It noticed 42 has a bracket around it. It means that's a number in a cell. Here, the 1 by 3 of double, that means there's a vector inside that cell. Here we got the quotes because there's a string inside that cell. And then we've got the logical 1. There's a Boolean, a logical inside that cell. The 879 is a number inside the cell. 1 by 3 of double is a vector inside that cell. This in quotes, Samuel in quotes, is a string inside that cell. And then the 0 here is a logical inside that cell. And if you go up here and you look at E, it is a 1 by 8 cell array of cells. And so that's 8 Ziploc bags. We're getting a little look in to see what's inside, but those are all cells. And so if you look here, E indexed at 1, I get the first thing in. Notice it still has the brackets around it. That's not the number 42. That's a cell with the number 42 in it. If you look at Amy here, E indexed at 3. That's not the string Amy. That's a cell with the string Amy in it. Same thing here with Samuel on E indexed at 7. Okay, so this idea of cell arrays is by putting the braces around it. You put everything in a Ziploc baggie, everything in a cell, and so you can have different types inside the baggies. But when you look at it from a broader picture, that is a homogeneous vector that has nothing but cells in it. And we're going to go on to the next video and talk about how do you access the values in the cells.